Well aware this was not enough time to deal with a very profoundly important question, but this is, part of why we get this group together. You're very much our brain trust. I'd love to hear from just 3 or 4 tables very, very briefly about, a couple of things you may have come up with. And again, we've captured all this. This will all come back into the convergence thought process. But if I can just get a couple of volunteers, ideally not necessarily the convergence staff person who captured the notes, but maybe somebody else who was sitting at the table. I know you all figured the convergence person would do that. So if I look, for example, I'm going to look at table 7, because I happened to walk by and table 7 was talking about things around tools to move this forward. Anybody from table 7 want to volunteer to just give us a moment or two of your reflections? Art, John, Lindsay, Jeff. Art, John, Lindsay, Jeff. Jeff, Lindsay, Art, John. See, I do know most of you, so that's problematic. Okay, John, just a moment or two, seriously, not to put you on the spot.
So we were riffing a little bit on the concept of if we're looking at how to create the groundswell.
Yep.
We started to coalesce around the idea of getting kind of millennials involved, and maybe doing it through whether it's virtual conferences or engaging with groups that are on campuses of all kinds, universities, colleges, community colleges, technical schools, really using kind of their comfort with social media to both create the message, transmit the message, raise money, kind of things that go viral. And the concepts that we've heard, like, why aren't you a $10 million organization? This resonates. Well, I think convergence is that kind of concept that can go viral if given the right platform. So using millennials, using colleges, institutions like that, maybe is one way to do it.
That's terrific. Thanks, John. And in fact, you've touched on something that I think we've all tried to deal with more effectively, is how to get millennials more engaged in our work. If you look around the table, I mean, Rob, Vic Fazio, Ron Pollock, and I are like the only millennials here. Actually, no, I'm sorry. Rob's grandchildren are millennials. I'm sorry. I got confused there. Okay, let me hear from another table. Let's hear table 6. When I walked by, you guys had a lot of energy. So maybe we can get somebody, just take a moment there, and then we'll get to 1 or 2 other tables. And who's going to volunteer to present there? It is going to be Bob Chase. Thanks, Bob.
You're welcome, Rich. So we talked a lot about the models for the conversations that we were having and the need to maybe expand the input into those conversations. We talked a lot about using additional representation from the grassroots and bringing together what we might call unexpected voices to the table to expand the output from those tables. We talked a lot about using local examples and really rooting the kinds of modeling and suggestions that we make in successes that are built in local examples of or local models that are in use using the convergence model. And then we talked about shifting the paradigm from a kind of concentric circles networking to a web-based model of networking where the connections are across social sectors, and that can enrich the conversation and the possibility for outcomes. So those are some of the things that we talked about. And,
that's pretty robust in 20 minutes.
Yeah, well,
Bob, on a serious note, when you refer to the grassroots, tell me what you're referring to there.
Well, we felt that there needed to be, voices that are articulated among the recipients of the work that is done, of these overarching issues that confront us as a society, not just influential leaders, though we're not in any way suggesting that that's not important, but that voice needs to be supplemented by a diversity of people on the who are recipients of the work that we are proposing.
Excellent. Thank you. We've got time for one more table. Any table want to volunteer because your discussion was so robust? We actually have a volunteer. I'm always excited when that happens. Way in the back.
Not an enviable position I'm in to report here, but so we talked about a few things. The question brings up viewpoint. People, and there seems to be a spectrum. If you take a specific issue, there's people that are either on totally opposite ends of the spectrum and are triggered and uninterested in engaging, or people in the middle who might be willing to try something out that Convergence does. There's the groundswell issue, which is very much a fundraising question, an implementation question, a marketing question, and the issues of working on issues of consequence, which is we talked about power dynamics and influencers. And do you start from the grassroots, or do you try and attack people who have power and influence? And I think the conversation may have brought us to consensus around you really want to attack both sides. You want to try and get people who may be really difficult to come to the table, and the people who are willing to sit down and talk, and start at the grassroots and influencers and work towards the middle.
Wow.
And to get outside of DC.
As a New York-based board member, I am strongly supportive of relocating the office. And I believe now that I've stacked the board with New York people, we have the votes. We have the votes. Sorry, Rob. This is incredible, and I mean that seriously. Just in 20 minutes, the amount of stuff that you guys covered and the richness of the ideas. We will take this back. I mean that seriously, to discuss when Convergence's management team meets, at board meetings. This stuff really informs how we think about positioning ourselves to go forward. So thank you for that. That was really terrific. And Rob, thank you for those excellent remarks to kick all this off. Okay, I'm going to switch hats now, and Stuart Butler is going to come up here with me. And Stuart, we're going to talk about a real simple situation called working with Congress. Come on up. Okay, grab a seat, Stuart. I'm going to stand for the first part, then I'll join you for the second part. Okay. Yes, there will be a break after this component of the day. I can see the movement already. Okay. Rob mentioned in his remarks about our work with the Bipartisan Working Group in Congress. As he mentioned, BPWG is a group of 28 House members, 14 Ds, 14 Rs, and their mission is basically to find areas of common ground that can help Congress move forward initiatives on more of a bipartisan basis. The group has been around for 7 years, and I'm going to talk a bit about that. What's Convergence's role here? Rob read to you, the incredible letter that we received from the House inviting us essentially to consult with them over the next 2 years. This is our largest consulting engagement, by the way. It's a very significant one, funded by the Hewlett Foundation and one other foundation. And our role really is twofold. One is to help them in their weekly deliberations be exposed to really our network of diverse opinions around issues of importance. So we can identify for them speakers who may have different perspectives around veterans affairs or infrastructure or immigration or whatever the issue might be. And we bring those different diverse viewpoints into their conversations. The second thing is, and this is really where I'm going to focus more today, is to try to bring the convergence approach, which I think may be the phrase that they actually used in their invitation letter. I'm not sure they know what they're getting into with that, but they asked us to bring the convergence approach so that they can collaborate more effectively as a group, and also so that they can have greater influence with the larger House. So the group has been around 7 years, and they held their first ever retreat in early May of this year. I had the privilege of both designing and facilitating that day, and it really was an incredible day. And Stuart was a real partner in crime on this one, as were a few other people. We'll talk more about some of the things that happened. But I want to talk about the design of this day, because I think that's very important, and it speaks a lot to how Convergence approaches some of these issues when we're dealing with basically the issues of consequence that we just referred to over there. The design had some really interesting challenges, because when you're dealing with legislators and their staffs, and the staffs play a very central role, as many of you know, They are so focused. When I said to them, what would be success for you at this session? They said, progress on policy and maybe agreement on moving some legislation forward. I said, we have 5 hours. We have 5 hours, and by the way, for how many years have you done neither of those? Okay? And it was very, very interesting, but it was a serious discussion because what we wanted to do was to get them to understand that sometimes before you can move forward and make real progress on tangible issues, and as you'll see, they did make real progress, you sometimes have to pull back and just look at some things about who you are, how you want to be operating, what your kind of end game is here. And the group we discovered when we were designing this never had a conversation about what success for BPWG would look like going forward. Tangible success. I'm not talking about, creating an environment where, or really tangible success. What could BPWG do to move things forward differently in the House and also just among the 28 folks? So we basically took some time at the beginning of the meeting to create that shared picture of success. I mean, everybody in this room, I'm sure, has been in a conversation or an offsite where there was a conversation about creating a picture of success. For them, this was really an epiphany, and I think I can say without question, I'd love to hear Stuart's thoughts on this in a few minutes, changed the nature of the way they had their conversations. Because what did they come up with? First of all, it's the first time they ever thought about it. They said, well, we meet every week. I said, great, and impact? Well, not much impact over 7 years. Do a lot of the freshmen congressmen even know about you? Probably a lot don't. So you're not that visible, you haven't had a level of success. Okay, let's look at what is and how do we go forward? And when we asked them the question of what success would look like, we got some really interesting answers. One was, this is a direct quote from one of the representatives, making sure that bipartisanship is no longer a 4-letter word, signing on to each other's legislation whenever possible, and most importantly, and this is really what drove the rest of the day and I think their mission going forward, is becoming a place where House leadership goes for ideas and for honest and objective analysis of issues. That is a very powerful role because there ain't any of those places right now. And these guys said, we could really have an impact. If we're the place, if people want to know kind of what's the landscape around immigration or Veterans Affairs or whatever it might be, they know they can come to the 28 of us, and they do hope to grow a bit. They know that they can come to us and get an honest picture of what's going on and what some of the issues are and what the data is. What are the facts? So that was a pretty powerful breakthrough. And the energy here was really just phenomenal. It was really palpable because they just got excited about saying, this is what we can be. And that was really important for a group that essentially spent its time just looking at different viewpoints, not just, but spent most of the time looking at different viewpoints on issues, but didn't have a really good vehicle for moving those things forward differently. Now, you can't have a meeting of legislators, obviously, without also dealing with issues of policy, and that is totally appropriate. Stuart was an enormous help here when he and I were brainstorming a little bit about how to design this meeting. He has way more experience on the Hill than I do. There's a hill on Lexington Avenue in Manhattan that I sometimes walk up. Stuart, it's actually not even a hill, it's more like an incline. Incline actually. I get credit on my iPhone for steps when I go up it. Stuart had an interesting thought, which is let's challenge them on two things. One is an issue around which there already is a fair amount of bipartisan agreement, and another is one that we called more of a reach issue. And the issues that we decided to focus on, again, please remember, we only had 5 hours. They did take a nice lunch break. It was in the most beautiful room. I have facilitated meetings for well over 30 years around the world. By far the most beautiful room I have ever worked in the Library of Congress. It looked like it was straight out of, Versailles. And I'm serious. If you want to see the pictures, I did take a couple because my colleagues and family did not believe that we had a meeting in that room. Okay? So we focused on two issues. The issue around which there was bipartisan agreement across, within the House is clearly the one of infrastructure. Nobody's against it. Who here opposes infrastructure? Okay, Okay, Sharon does, okay. Or Dennis Passes may have opposed infrastructure. Okay, well, he's from Chicago, so that's okay. The second issue we chose was a little bit more complicated. It's another I issue, and that was immigration. Now, the question becomes here, not solving these, but what can BPWG accomplish in the next 3 or 4 hours to enable this group to be more effective in moving forward progress on these issues in Congress? Very different mandate than they sometimes had. And on infrastructure, let me just give you a couple of highlights on that as to where they took that, because I think it was very, very interesting. They made enormous progress on it, and they are already following up on that stuff. One of the points they made was nobody agrees on what the phrase infrastructure means. Everybody is completely in favor of infrastructure. And to Bob Chase, it might mean bridges and tunnels and roads. And to somebody else, it might mean access to broadband. To somebody else, it means protection from flooding. To somebody else, it means 1,000 other things. So they said it would actually be nice, and we have a better chance of moving something forward in Congress if we could actually get clarity around a legislative definition of what infrastructure means. And how do we frame this so that we can bring a range of different people under this now hopefully clearer umbrella, and they can have a different conversation about moving it forward? And they came up with a very interesting framing, and it probably isn't perfect, and I know, Rob, you and I talked about it afterwards, and they may fine-tune this a little bit. But the framing they came up with was interesting. They said infrastructure should enable economic opportunity regardless of where you live. That's a real, we only had like an hour on infrastructure. These guys were really, said, we got to figure out a way to frame this. Economic opportunity, wow, that anchors it in something that every congressperson is in favor of. And everywhere you live means you don't end up with the battles of, is it fixing city bridges or is it giving rural areas access to broadband? So they came up with a framing they thought could work. And they then developed a very specific plan, which is actually being implemented now, about how to approach the different House committees, the appropriate House committees, to get this unstuck. And they've already taken some action around that. I'm not at liberty to talk about the details of all of it. That would just be inappropriate. But they're like moving this forward and in touch with different people in different ways as a result of this great conversation they had. Immigration. That was different. Okay. As you'd expect, the BPWG members, like everybody else in Congress, really are reflective of a range of views about how to tackle immigration. But they also said, we need to figure out if there's some common ground here. And by the way, we had people, and Stuart, you may, I hope, agree with this, from the kind of pretty far right to the center left. We didn't really have far left. We had pretty far right to center left in the group. But people who, again, are incredibly committed across the board to bipartisanship, regardless of where they are in the political spectrum. So we're kind of figuring out here, okay, how do you find common ground here? And for those of you who've been stakeholders, Matt and Ron and many others who've been stakeholders in our meetings, Mark, we started in a very convergency way. We said, why is this issue important to you on a personal level? And it was one of the most touching, breathtaking sessions that I've ever seen with a group of people. Why? Because we went around the room, and here's some of what we heard. One member said, this really matters to me because in 1947, my great-grandmother, my grandmother, and my mother landed at Ellis Island in New York as survivors of the Holocaust. That's why immigration matters to me. Another member said that this matters a lot to me because my family participated in the Bracero program in the 1950s. Some of you, I'm sure, are familiar with Bracero. Another member, and this is the one that really, I mean, this was literally touching, and this was somebody who truly was in tears, said, it matters to me because I have a daughter-in-law who's a dreamer. But I didn't know that until she was recently deported. Wow. Okay? There were 10 other examples like that. So suddenly the issue became one that was very different. It matters to each of us. We each have a stake in this. regardless of how we might approach it. We didn't ever discuss walls or barriers or fences or netting or anything like that. We discussed the actual issue of immigration. And how did they move this forward? Well, again, limited amount of time. But what they said was a couple things. First of all, one member who very, very strong-willed, very, very interesting individual, very smart, and probably, from what I've been told in previous meetings, was a little bit more confrontational than some of the others were. Spoke from the heart and spoke from the head and got everybody's attention. And basically what he said, there are two strengths this country has, okay? And he is pretty far right. He said there are two strengths. We have strengths around unity and we have strengths around diversity. That is our common ground for starters. Nobody here feels differently, I hope. And everybody said, well, yeah, unity and diversity is certainly what we agree on. And what they also all agreed on was, and this may sound like, is that important? Well, it really is. They all agreed on the fact that there ultimately needs to be a good process for legal immigration to reduce the incentive for illegal immigration. Now, what a good process means, I mean, they just started the conversation here. But that's, again, a fairly powerful anchor for future conversations going forward. Now, what was very interesting was there was one other breakthrough here. And folks said, this is really a complex issue. And one woman said, I really don't even know what half the acronyms stand for that people are using. We refer to the 1952 Act, and I don't even know, I wasn't even born then, okay? And people said, me neither. I don't know what the true complexities here are. I have views about how to address them, but I'm not really smart enough to go forward with the level of informed opinion that if this group is a source of honest and objective information, we need to get smarter ourselves. That was a real breakthrough for a bunch of Congress people to say, we don't know enough about the issue that we're sitting here all debating, fighting, and yelling at each other over. And the step they took immediately is we are going to start an Immigration 101 boot camp for this committee. And it is underway. Now, that again, that's a pretty good day. Did they resolve immigration infrastructure? Well, no. But it was a very, very powerful day. And before I turn it over to Stuart, just a couple of quick comments on the day. One is, I hope everybody here really appreciates the significance of the fact that Convergence is deeply engaged with this group and has been invited by Congress to play an active role with BPWG over a 2-year period. And clearly, our hope is that maybe this will be a stepping stone to work more broadly with Congress. This is a major breakthrough for that April 1st idea from 10 years ago. Very major for this organization. Second, I think we were all struck by the sincerity, the honesty, the intelligence, and the commitment among people who see the world in very different ways to figuring out ways of working together differently to what, in their own terms, they said, we have to stop the ridiculous dysfunction. And they pointed, out of our window, you could see the Capitol building. They said, how do we get 100 yards over there and bring what we're doing here over those 100 yards? And they're deeply committed to that, again, regardless of political perspective. Finally, what Convergence has learned and done over the last 10 years, without question, can help this group continue to move forward and accelerate their progress. So the transferability of our learnings and our experiences was so clear after that day. Now let me turn it over to my partner in crime, comrade in arms, I don't know, Stuart. Stuart's like a lot of things. He's actually head of fund development, Doozy. You may not know that, but with all the foundation money he's brought in. Stuart, your thoughts on the day?
Sure, thank you. And I think that was a really good description of the day and how we could make some progress. And what I'd like to do is just to take a couple of minutes to kind of give you maybe another kind of perspective of what was going on there. I think it's fair to say, well, I think actually there's a historian at Harvard, David Moss, who says, when you think about American democracy, it's good to have a dose of hypochondria every so often because you tend to kind of feel really gloomy and then you figure out what to do. And I think there is a tendency to be just a bit too hypochondriac, having a bit too much hypochondria about the American political system, and the assumption that a lot of Americans have that those people up on the Hill, those members of Congress, are sort of beyond hope.
Yeah.
And I have spent almost 40 years, well, over 40 years in Washington dealing with the Hill and so on. And I always feel, and I think it's absolutely true today, that underneath that concern, you do see, and we saw this exactly in these members who came together, that there is a desire, a very strong desire among most members of Congress to deal with the issues of polarization and to talk with each other and to try to find ways forward. That's why people come to the Hill. They usually come to the Hill to get something done. And so there's that great desire to do it, and you see it. And what happened in this retreat, I think there's kind of two pieces I want to kind of really emphasize. Number one, we were working with a caucus on Capitol Hill. Now, caucuses on Capitol Hill are really these informal, typically informal organizations of members. And they're not official committees, they don't pass legislation, and so on. But that's a good thing, because what they're able to do is to talk to each other and to look at ideas and issues and kind of move them forward. And if you actually look at how a lot of ideas move through the Congress, it's often this sort of trickle-up approach from members actually talking to each other across the aisle that then kind of gradually kind of moves up, and then eventually the leadership comes in. Sometimes they scotch the idea completely, but other times they embrace it. So working with the bipartisan policy group is really important, because it is where the opportunities are to get people to talk to each other and to develop ideas and to move forward. And that's exactly what you saw in this particular case. Also, of course, the other thing I just want to emphasize, as Rich said, is that we approach them with the techniques that we use in the very projects that you heard about from Rob earlier. Going around the room, getting people to share their personal stories completely changes the way people think about each other. We had, as an example, a Republican former sheriff from Florida, I believe, sitting next to a woman from a leading member of the Black Caucus from Delaware. And if you didn't know that, and if all you did was read the transcript, you probably wouldn't know which was which, because they were all talking, both of them talking about the value in particular of immigration, the importance of the rule of law, to have a legal system that is functional as opposed to dysfunctional, which we currently really have in immigration. So they were able to talk in that way. As also Rich said, they also were able to kind of come together on what these sort of broad principles are. And I find that actually happens a lot on Capitol Hill if you set up the opportunity to do it. And so I'm very optimistic about what we're doing on Capitol Hill, and I think it's really important. It's important both for the operations of the Congress itself, but also it's important in terms of giving ultimately a different vision to the American people of Congress and of Washington, because I don't believe we will ever see a change in the mood around the country and people really talking to each other at the level necessary unless they can see that it's breaking out in Congress too. So this is really very, very important work. So I think it was a tremendous start. I think they really appreciated the value of bringing in a professional like Rich, who's very used to dealing with conflict and how to move it forward. And that what we can do down the road in helping them get up to speed on something like immigration, because I think that's going to be really crucial. I've spent a lot of time dealing with caucuses over many years in different areas, the economic mobility area, for example, and then in earlier incarnations in the healthcare area. And when members say, this is a difficult issue, and we're going to become the experts on this issue, the go-to guys on this issue, that can be a critical stage in beginning to build a consensus and an understanding of an issue. And I think they will do a lot in the infrastructure area soon, which is one of the things they really wanted to do. But I think in many ways, I think we can guide them on the immigration area in a way where they will really make a profound difference to the way other members look at that issue. And so by becoming experts in the area, the go-to people, by sort of really understanding that issue and the principles involved in being sort of odd bedfellows, strange bedfellows in that will make a huge difference.
Okay, thanks, Stuart. We have a couple of minutes if anybody, if you want to take a couple, we were happy to take a couple questions if anybody has. Ron and Vic, we have a number of hands. I'd also be very curious to hear your take as the resident former congressman in this room here. Other former congress people, raise your hand. Okay, Vic, sounds like you're it. So let me first start out. Whose hand did I see? I saw Bob's hand, and then let me get to Vic just for his comment. We just have a few minutes for this, but Stuart and I are happy to continue talking, over lunch a little later on. Ronnie, I'm sorry, we started with you. Did I say you first or Bob? Ron. Let me get to Ron Pollock first, and then Vic.
So I just have a question.
Yeah.
You talked about this as a 2-year process.
Yes.
And what you described, which I thought was very thoughtful and very similar to some of the conversations that I've seen Convergence lead. How do you see this process rolling out further in terms of what the next steps are?
Yeah.
Will there be different iterations for the 2 issues, or is it going to be more general?
I can answer part of that, and Rob, you may also have some views on this, I'm sure, because you have obviously deeply involved in this. One thing is, it definitely does depend on, some of the directions that they would like to go. Okay, it's very important that we obviously be sensitive to where the BPWG members feel energy and want to move. I'd be very surprised in light of the feedback we got after the retreat. I mean, they already said on the way out, a couple of them said to me, can we do this for 3 hours over dinner one night? So we do this regularly and have a different kind of conversation than the 1 hour, let's share information on issue X real quickly because we all have to go to other things. So I think there's a lot of ways. Part of it will be a continuing role for Convergence in bringing in diverse speakers that they would not otherwise hear from. I think there'll be more of this working on issues because they saw that a lot can get done when you structure the time differently. And I also think, potentially, my hope would be that over time there'd be an opportunity to lift the impact a little bit to a broader segment of Congress and maybe some other caucuses.
Can I just ask, is there any understanding about where leadership on both sides stands in terms of this process? They obviously must be aware of it at some level.
That would be an understatement. Yeah.
Is this threatening? Is it something?
Well, I may comment on that. I think that's where you get into some of the distinctions between different kinds of caucuses you're familiar with. You get some that, like problem solvers or something like this, that really are trying to push the leadership in a certain way and are very, very visible, very high profile. The Bipartisan Policy Group, I think, working group, sees itself in a sort of more of an under-the-radar approach. That was also true, by the way, of the Economic Mobility Caucus, and continues to be true. And Derek Kilmer, by the way, who's heads the co-chair of the working group, was also co-chair of the Economic Mobility Caucus. And so they're kind of going under the radar. So they're not a direct threat to the leadership, unlike some others. And I think that's wise for this kind of organization, this kind of caucus. So I think what they're going to try to do is to help, like I call the trickle-up sort of approach.
They're creating some fires.
Just gradually sort of moving things along, letting it kind of move up, being cooperative, but making that their approach rather than sort of taking on the leadership. And it's important to take on leadership too, let me not say otherwise. But their particular role is this more sort of under-the-radar strategy, I think. And I think that's what they will continue to do.
Yeah. Rob, you want to add something to that? Then we'll take comments from Vic, and I don't want to get us too off schedule here. We'll take some comments from Vic, and we will move on. But again, Stuart and I and Rob are very, very happy to continue this conversation over lunch with anybody who's interested.
I think the main comment is we welcome input from experienced hands how to do this. I think they're very much in a formative stage. They mainly met once a week for maybe 3 times a month, and in an hour they trade bills and some more stories and all that. So we're trying to help them get focused for impact. I can imagine if they feel like they can move something on infrastructure, they might continue their learning on immigration but look at other issues. They weren't organized for success. The 1 hour meeting with people in and out on their phones, on the run, has led them to say, we need to spend more time with each other. Thus, not only maybe a 2-hour dinner, but they also may want a periodic retreat with us to reconnoiter about where their priorities are. These are very busy people. Vic, I'll turn it over to you, but these people are really busy. Derek Kilmer also chairs the new Select Committee on Congressional Modernization. So it's really hard to get their attention, but I think we've landed. I don't want to overstate it. We hope to grow this out. We're not sure of the full potential, but we're off to a great start.
Can I just say one anecdote here? Having, obviously worked with a lot of groups over a lot of years, fewer people were on their iPhones in this meeting than with any corporate group I've worked with in the last 20 years. They actually took it serious. Not to say once in a while somebody didn't say, oh my God, I have to leave for a minute. They were totally focused on, they said, kind of, this is precious time. We're going to use it well. And they were in the room, which I think is a real statement, actually, in terms of where their heads were around this. Vic, just some comments from you would be great.
Well, first of all, I think it's a real feather in our cap, in Convergence's cap, that you were asked to do this and that you played a constructive role. Congress really needs safe places to go and talk, where they don't really get exposed to the right and left blowback that is inevitable on almost every issue. And I think if they continue to enjoy sitting down quietly and interacting with each other, this might have legs. There used to be an organization, still is, I'm involved with a group called Faith in Politics. Rob knows them. They used to do reflection groups or prayer groups or Bible study, depending on where you were coming from on the religious spectrum. But it was a way of getting people together, often for an hour in the morning, to talk about the bigger things in life. And getting to know each other was the real benefit of it. The Congress today does not interact with each other very much. That's why this is such a wonderful oasis that they have found. They are in and out, they're on and off the phone, they're in the airport, going home, coming back. They don't live in Washington anymore, which is, I think, a sad commentary, because that's where you find more time easing in on Monday or Tuesday and having Friday and then seeing each other on the weekend. That doesn't exist. Yeah. So if we do something to help them find a safe place to go and actually honestly talk about issues, and as they've indicated, get informed about issues, we've made a great progress. I hesitate to rain on this parade in any way, but the devil's in the details. How are we going to raise the revenue if we could figure out what to do with infrastructure?
Yes. That was something they did mention as an issue, yes.
And immigration has so many moving parts.
Yeah.
But I do think this is an extremely important and constructive way of taking the kind of collaborative process that we have perfected and grafting it onto a very dysfunctional system that needs it desperately.
Okay. Thanks, Vic, and I suspect we will be coming to you for periodic and regular counsel on this. Okay, again, I apologize. I just want to make sure we don't throw off speakers who are coming in to join us. We're going to take a 10-minute break now, and then when we come back, we're going to have a terrific presentation on the Reentry Ready project that Stephanie will lead us through. So thank you.